Thanks so much for joining us. We're here to commemorate and give some awareness and honoring to ADHD Month. And we are three professionals from a broad spectrum in how we work with people or people that love those who are challenged by ADHD symptoms or behavior traits. And so my name is Johanna Lynn. I work with what we inherit from the family, these emotional patterns that are often fairly invisible. And believe it or not, there is a huge influence around how that might contribute to ADHD symptoms. And I'd like to pass it over to my colleague Anne-Marie to simply introduce herself, and then over to Rajal.
My name is Anne-Marie Nada. The work that I do as an ADHD coach is with ADHD and beyond. And I work with people who have ADHD or ADHD tendencies. And we really work to have a fuller understanding of that person's expression of ADHD, how it shows up for them, and then creating environments that support their best functioning. And many people report a great reduction in their ADHD symptoms, and they just get on to living their genius in their life. So it's pretty rewarding work.
Living your genius. If we can all carve that path, right? I love that term. That's so good.
Yeah, and Rajal too. Let me pass it over to her because she does amazing work with her clients as well.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, I hope so. Yes, my name is Rajal, Rajal Dhruva. I have a practice here in Austin, Texas. It's called ATX, Life Coaching. So I am a life coach. I'm a certified life coach, but I also have I should say, an added training in ADHD. So I'm an ADHD coach and also a life coach. And I work with families, I work with adults, I work with teenagers, I work with a wide variety of clientele. The family dynamic is my calling. I love working with families because I have seen, and this has also been proven, that ADHD tendencies don't just get you don't see it in one person. You see it in the entire family. It affects the whole family, even if there's only one person that's affected. So yes, I also work with similar traits that ADHD brings, and we create a life out of changing the environment that the person can control. So making the person who is affected by ADHD, make them in control of their environment. And the environment can be broad. It could be through nutrition. It could be through, how they live their life. Create a situation where they feel that they have control over their life. So I think I said a little bit too much, but it's somewhat connected to how epigenetics comes into play, because it's true that we inherit our ADHD traits, but it's also true that our environment plays a big role in certain behaviors that show up as ADHD. So learning to control your environment can have a big impact on taking control of your life.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well said. Absolutely. What do you think about that, Anne-Marie? Because it's a little bit along what you were sharing too, and where you were coming at.
Yeah, actually, I'll probably be referring to this book quite often throughout our talk today. It's Scattered Minds by Dr. Gabor Mate. And there's a quote in here saying, there is in ADD, and he interchanges those titles or labels quite fluidly, so ADD or ADHD. There is in ADD an inherited predisposition, but that's very far from saying there's a genetic predetermination. Mm-hmm. A predetermination dictates that something will inevitably happen. A predisposition only makes it more likely that it may happen, depending on circumstances. The actual outcome is influenced by many other factors. Mm. And if I may just take another moment here, there's just another little blurb that I thought summed it up so well when in the discussion of epigenetics mm-hmm. and ADHD. Environment does not cause ADD any more than genes cause ADD. So it's not purely environmental, it's not purely genetic. And okay, I'll just continue this and then I'll add my own little comment there. What happens is that if certain genetic material meets, I'm sorry, I really should have put my glasses on today. What happens is that if certain genetic material meets a certain environment, ADD may result. Without genetic material, no ADD. Without that environment, no ADD. The formative environment is the family of origin. That being said, I'm sure that parents and adults alike have been on the receiving end of just try harder, if you only would, bad parenting. I mean, we've heard all the refrains, and it's simply not true. And we're not here to say that today either, that parenting is the cause of ADHD. It certainly is not. There are many environmental factors, including the environment or the family of origin, that can create some of these, the manifestation of some of the predisposed genetic factors. So Johanna, pardon me, if you wouldn't mind explaining a little bit more about epigenetics and how that plays into our understanding of ADD.
Absolutely. And I really love what you shared there, because I think some people want to go down the genetic place or down the family of origin place as if it were only one or the other. I think this is a situation like many things in life where it's such a compounding factor. There are so many intricacies involved. And so I love that you summed it up that way, because it's an important kind of launching part for where we're going to go today in today's conversation. So from my perspective, because I work in a practice that's all about what we inherit from our family, how do any one of us get to be the way we are? It's certainly not by accident. We really have within us an imprint, if you will, right down to the DNA, right as information at the cellular level that influences how we show up. Whether we feel calm or confident, whether we feel shaky, anxious, nervous, included some of the primary symptoms that we have known as a culture now to put under that umbrella of ADHD. And so what I see in my practice, in the actual cases that I've had related to this, is whenever I have, and to be honest with you, it's mostly been young teens, your early 20s, that's been sort of who I've worked with, where the parent has called and said, we're really struggling with our child, we're not sure how to best support, what can we do? Or can we bring this child to you because we're at a loss? And always I say to the family, we need to work together as a unit, or I'll just work with mom and dad, because so much of what I gather is family history. And a lot of the times, a young person is just not going to know that. And so where I trace it back, where that epigenetics part comes in and influences that environment of the body, that young person, is often, if we look at it from a very early life experience place, did mom have to go back to work straight away? I mean, my mom had to go back to work at 6 weeks. It doesn't mean it's a terrible thing, or if that happens, it only leads to this place. But that many parents have that influence where that's just where we're at, and that's just what's needed. So if we as a child don't have that optimum place where mom and dad's attunement and attention is really consistent and with us, we tend to be really easily pulled away from our focus, because the focus point of any infant or any young child, as you could imagine, is where's mom? Where's dad? Where's my safety? Where's my nourishment? Where's that love and attention, which ranks right up there with oxygen for a brand new baby? And so the sourcing of that centered, calm feeling in the body really isn't there. So there's that as a main influence that I've seen over and over again. Or even if mom and dad were fighting a lot and there didn't seem to be a safe place to put that energy, that there was a lot of chaos and intensity in the home environment, that's another influence that I've seen. And then Rajal was sharing with me something that she was talking about with a client that reminded me that sometimes it comes from a grandparent, you know, showcasing some of these experiences, but we didn't have the labels that we have today. You know, so we don't know what's behind grandpa being impulsive or, you know, expressing some of these experiences. And yet the children or the grandchildren, because science shows this stuff goes on for 2 generations, living on in the material of the body. And so at the front line, you know, we're just looking for the child maybe to, you know, pay better attention in school or pick that focused direction and move forward in life. But until we deal with the foundation, we're just sort of building a house on a bunch of sand. You know, we have to look at these deeper roots in order to really thrive and move forward. And that's what, from what I understand, what the two of you have shared with me about your specialty is where you guys come in and say, okay, how do we extract the genius? How do we build an environment that really builds on your skills? How do we move forward and come into life in a way that actually feels a lot more easeful? Relationships and choices and all of that.
And this new science around epigenetics gives us reason to believe what scientists have said forever. You know, nutrition plays a big role, and certain lifestyle changes plays a big role in your happiness, everyday happiness. All of that sounds kind of cliche, but now there's an actual evidence behind why, and that's fascinating to me because you know I am a scientist. You know, my background is science. I'm a scientist anyway. But yes, and going back to also what Anne-Marie had mentioned around the different, how environments can be variable. Similar to that, I think it's important to also highlight that there isn't one specific magic ADHD gene. You know, speaking of epigenetics, it's a polygenetic situation. So just changing one environment may not necessarily change anything in your ADHD. Knowing, you know, there's a lot of trial and error, if you would, is what I'm trying to say, and trying to figure out which exact environment to change and how, in order to see the change you want to see. So, yeah.
And that's where I think the fine line comes in. And this is something Rajal and I were kind of debating amongst ourselves, or not debating, but engaging in like a curious conversation. Like, can ADHD be cured? You know, using what we know about creating healthy environments for the brain to heal and to thrive. And, you know, there's much more rigorous debate out there. But you know, from what Rajal was saying, you know, it's polygenetic. There is no DNA test for ADHD, and it manifests in different regions of the brain, and it expresses in different ways for different people. So at this point in our scientific literature, we don't have oh, it shows up in you in this way, so then we apply this sort of environmental change, this sort of diet, this sort of relationship pattern. We just do that fix and then you're cured, you know. And I think deep down, many of us want that for ourselves, and we're hoping to hear that, but that's really not what we're offering here today. Just a greater awareness that the expression of genes can be affected by a supportive environment. And so some of the environments that I look at with my clients to create optimal functioning starts with the very basics of functioning. You know, good old Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You know, do we have a secure, you know, place to sleep? Do we get enough sleep? Are we eating nutritious foods that feed our brains and our cells? Do we breathe deeply, bringing oxygenated blood to our brains? Do we exercise? You know, do we have healthy relationships then, you know, moving up the scale a little bit? Are we mindful and paying attention to our attention, where our attention is going? You know, Johanna, you were mentioning, you know, that scattered sense of attention, like, where do I orient myself? I do a lot of work with my clients on, you know, what are we paying attention to? and how to orient ourselves in the world. Because so many times the ADHD mind is wide open, and our filters don't work the same as neurotypicals, whose brains function in more typical ways. And so there's much more of an onslaught of sensory information. And it gets exhausting knowing what to pay attention to, what to filter out, and where to hone in. And so we work with that too, depending on the needs of the client.
I love those practical examples because it really brings it home into what does it look like? How do we actually get some traction to feel differently in the body? To sort of share with you guys the approach that I use, because so much of where my clients are coming from, it's not consciously remembered. And so a lot of it is beginning to go into the body, where the body holds this imprint, to allow for some more integration, so that we're actually coming from a different reference point. That grounded, focused calm is actually something that can be built upon and grown. Like we plant a seed, and now every day you move into that greater awareness, that feeling of how the body is grounded is something that can grow like a plant with a little sunshine and water. And so we actually feel differently in the body, and we go back into our lives and relationships from that place. So it sounds great. What the two of you do has this kind of practical move from this step to that step, and it matches so well with the deeper inner work that isn't so, I guess, tangible comes to mind. It's a little bit more in the body and hidden. So it's a nice complement.
And I was really fascinated, again, to refer back to Dr. Gabor Mate's book. There's some interesting chapters in there. What you were speaking about, Johanna, I'm sorry, I've said your name properly every time I've been in conversation with you all of a sudden today. Oh, I'm so sorry, Johanna. But what you were speaking of with attunement and attachment in those early days and months and years of life, that as adults, because I work mainly with adults, and so sometimes we can find ourselves triggered by something that we think is rooted in the moment. For instance, one of mine, if I'm in conversation with someone and I notice they're kind of drifting or looking down at something or not giving their full attention to me, God forbid, but something gets triggered in me, like, oh my goodness, I'm too boring, I'm not interesting enough, or I'm not, whatever, I'm not of value to this person. And it makes me nervous, and I start tripping over my words and whatnot, when actually it's likely an implicit memory. So that's more what you're speaking of with the body. It's an emotional memory. It's not an event memory or conceptual memory of a specific time. It's likely been encoded in a pre-verbal time. So as a baby, I wouldn't have had words for it. I wouldn't even remember the specific experience, but it's likely triggered an old infant experience of mom or dad or someone I needed attention from turning away. And it could have been something as simple as mom needs to make dinner and can't attend to the infant right now. It doesn't mean, a traumatic upbringing.
Exactly.
I certainly was raised, I was fortunate enough to be raised in a loving home. I'm also a very sensitive person and was always a sensitive child. So some of these very minor, normal things of growing up, of a gaze being averted or attention not being given, was received by this sensitive soul in a much more magnified way, and was internalized in a way that might have registered as trauma, and then affects things now in this life, like in this present time for me. So doing some of the work with healers and therapists like you, Johanna, has been extremely helpful in healing some of those things moving forward.
Beautiful. I love your description. It's so well created. It's so well talked through, because you are right. It's not a memory we can say, oh yeah, when I was 6 months or even 6 years sometimes, because our memory is is funny that way. It doesn't maybe pick it up. But the body memory is always something you can trust, which is why I often lead my clients to that place your body never lies. And so, we've got that early life experience kind of encoded in our body, and then that dictates how we navigate and even how we might move through a separation if our relationship comes to that. It's very much in those roots of attachment. And a lot of brain science supports that well over 95% of how our brain kind of gets hooked up, which neural pathways go where, do we feel safe or not, has to do with the primary relationship we had, with our mom or our primary caregiver. And so just as you said, are we a sensitive soul, but mom has to make dinner? And this sets up the hardwiring to be very sensitive when someone doesn't give us our full attention. And I'm sure, like the two of you, we hear a lot of other types of stories that are not so subtle, and that we could understand how anyone would be very sensitive or very alarmed if someone's attention moves away. There was an interesting article I shared with both of you a couple of weeks ago around, has ADHD and the diagnosis of that been confused or covered up by a lot of childhood trauma? Because so much of the symptoms, what we show, how we grow up as adults, look so similar. I thought that was so interesting.
Yes, I agree. And Rajal, you work quite a bit with families. Maybe you can speak to how you work with parents and healing the family system.
Right. A lot of what I do when it comes to families, there has to be, this is not, the first couple of conversations that we have at the family has to include a lot of education around what is ADHD. Teaching the kids, teaching the parents. I wouldn't call it teaching, but just really informing them how to see their parents or how to see their kids. Primarily the reason behind kids not feeling understood or not feeling like they have someone that they can lean on in the household is because the parents just don't understand that these certain behaviors are not in their control. And there's a lot of self-education that has to happen from a parental perspective. And if that's missing, then the kid does not feel connected, not only with the family, but also not connected with the environment, because nobody understands them. The family is where it all starts. So a lot of my work with the parents, usually the parents that actually reach out to me want me to work with the kids. And in the past, I used to do that, but I actually don't do that anymore unless the family actually signs with me as a whole, because the child needs support through parents, and it takes some work in trying to get the parents to see that if they were to just change the way they see their child and change their parenting approach, and it's not highlighting what they're doing wrong. It's just highlighting what they should be adding, highlighting how they can improve the confidence in their kids by simple language change. It's not only, it's a very simple thing. So that's primarily one of the things that I do when it comes to family. But I actually had another idea in mind that I wanted to piggyback on that you had mentioned around the whole healing. When triggered with that memory, how our cells actually remember that response. So a certain memory, you may not you may not remember what's triggering that in you, but our cells do. So we behave a certain way. And there's actual science, there's new science that actually tells us that positive affirmations actually, and I think Johanna, you probably agree with me, because that's where EFT comes into play, emotional freedom tapping, where when you introduce positive affirmations to remind yourself on a daily basis of how wonderful you are or how good you are in certain areas of your life, it actually can reverse some of that negative emotions that you're bringing from childhood that you don't even remember. Your cells remember. I hope I'm making sense, and this is all very infant. This whole, all of this research is so infant, so we don't really have a whole lot of knowledge around it, but it's just fascinating for me that there's hope in the future, that there are other ways to just make ourselves feel happy. There's our life that we can keep playing that control over. I hope that makes sense when I say it that way.
What I so appreciated about what you shared there is working with the whole family, because as kids, we don't have the ability to come in and change the whole environment. So even if you're working with that child and doing this exceptional work, but they go back into that environment, it's kind of like a catch-22. So I love the approach you shared around getting everybody involved. And for any busy family, it's helpful to know it's not a whole huge upheaval. It's, what to add. And I think the biggest thing, what I took away from what you shared, was adding a lot of awareness of, what are the things to look out for? What are the special things to add? So that it can be quite simple. And then we're all moving in the same direction, meaning like the whole family is going towards how to make it more easeful and be more integrated all together.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to add that because I have such love for science, sometimes just introducing certain things and the reasons behind why the dopamine isn't getting to your, reward mechanism. Sometimes just that little bit of an education around that does a lot, because the parent can then sit down during homework time and literally break out the assignment rather than be, forceful in getting the assignment done a certain way, the way our society expects us to get it done, So I don't know, I just gave that one small example, but there's so many little examples that you can actually trick your mind into creating a natural dopamine boost, So these are just small lifestyle changes that you can teach your parent that they can introduce with their kids. And I also work with the kid themselves, so I will repeat the same thing over and over again. And over time, they realize, this is just something that I have to play around with. And I have control over it, rather than fitting inside this ADHD box and feeling helpless.
I love it. Giving options, keeping it in the world of play. You put them back in the driver's seat. That is so cool.
Yeah.
And part of it too is really educating people, like Rajal mentioned, about the nature of the ADHD brain. There are some typical general things that that fit for most people who have ADHD, as opposed to neurotypical. So neurotypical brains, or the owners of neurotypical brains, are often motivated by importance, by timelines, because they can see time in a linear sense. Where people who are the owners of ADHD brains, their brains click on and work and get fired up, usually with interest, with urgency, and novelty. So if we can ask ourselves those questions when we're having a hard time getting started and our brain just isn't clicking into gear and the motivation just isn't there, okay, well, how can I make this interesting to me? And it might require some real creativity to find how do I make chores interesting, right? How do I make it new? How do I create some sense of urgency without tipping over into the overload of stress, like pushing it right to the nth minute of deadline, and creating an overload of stress that often works for many ADHD people, but with limited success. It can end up backfiring on you.
Yeah. Well, are you ladies, should we open up, take Brad and Darren off mute and see if they have a question for us? Don't feel pressured, guys, if you don't, but just wanted to make sure that the option was there for you. Let's see. Oh, Darren, unmute. What's going on? There we go. Everybody's unmuted, I think. And did you guys have a question at all? We just wanted to make sure to give you the chance to bring you into the conversation.
Yeah, this is Brad. Listen, thank you first of all for the wonderful discussion. I mean, it's very certainly very interesting topic to myself, and there's always an ability to learn a lot more in this area.
Well, thanks for your open mind and being here with us. That's awesome, Brad.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, I think for me, certainly. So I'm not a parent, but I was, of course, child. I guess for me, in the reading that I've been doing in my involvement, a lot of it is sort of, and I think Anne Marie touched on this, sort of, when you find yourself in, you sort of confront this idea of like, oh well, like I'm, this is how my brain works in a way. And so, what can I do about it now, in a way, rather than say like it's a bit too late to sort of tap my parents with being different parents. But yet I'm still, do you understand what I'm saying? But yet I'm still here and like, sort of finding, okay, like what can I do for myself? Like how can I bring that awareness? And then when I get that awareness, like how can that turn into changes in my life? Does that make sense? I mean, it's not necessarily a question, but just sort of an observation of like what I think meshes with the discussion about what the challenges that a lot of people feel, certainly myself as well.
Absolutely. So I'll just sort of answer from how I understood, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Brad. You're right. I think a lot of people get to this place and say, well, my parenting was what it was. I mean, what can I do about it from here? And I think a really big piece for those of us who are now adults is to sort of look at our lives and then imagine looking out towards our parents as if to say, thank you. You've given me the greatest gift, which is this life. And even if you are at work all the time or struggling with whatever you were struggling with or whatever the backstory is, I received enough. Because the truth is, when I look out at my life, when I look out at all that I'm grateful for, there's kind of proof everywhere. And mom and dad, the rest, I'm going to take it from here. So whether I'm working with Anne Marie, in your example, Brad, whether I'm going to go out and join a running club, if that's something that lights you up, the things that feed my soul, the things that light me up, the things that create novelty, curiosity, and interest, I'm going to take it from here. And each and every time I make space for this, mom and dad, each and every time I invest in myself in this way, it's in honor of you. And that's how we stay close now. Because as adults, that's what we can do from here. Likely most of us know better how we can support and serve ourselves even than what our parents could do from this place. Does that make sense? Does that kind of swing into what you were asking?
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I think that's a very positive, I think, outlook on it. And I think, and eventually I think maybe we all kind of come to that place as well, regardless of, I mean, everyone has a childhood, right? And none of them are perfect, regardless of how they deal with it now. So no, but thank you very much for that perspective.
It's so true. We all come from that place, and some of us a little more unscathed than others. And what I love about, I think Rajal shared that there are these things we can do now, and I was even this weekend learning a technology for brain science around what are specific breathing techniques, moving techniques we can do to flood the brain with neurotransmitters that make us feel good. That our ability to make the choices that are most aligned to what we want, they are in our hands. And I think moving forward, it is up to us. And so I love how you received that, Brad. That's awesome.
Yeah, and if I can just kind of piggyback on that,
Please.
The work I do with some of my adults, I mean, I work in a very individualized way. So, I mean, that's part of what lights my brain up is the novelty of every client is different and walks in with a different history and a different present circumstance. And we take bits of both and, what the strengths are and move forward with that. Like what Brad was saying, okay, there's this awareness now, and how am I going to choose to move forward with it? My parent isn't parenting me anymore. That time is over. Now, how am I going to handle my adult years moving forward with the experiences that have shaped me? And so for some adults that I work with, we engage in some sort of, for lack of a better term, it's almost like learning how to parent ourselves again. So many of the adults that I work with also have high expectations of themselves. And so, you know, when you have that blend of ADHD and perfectionism, it can be a perfect storm. So much of the work that we do is some awareness around, well, are you providing the things that you need for yourself? So when you're in a spin of overwhelm or drive, you know, you're on that wheel, it's just the nonstop, I call it the hamster wheel, right? It just can't stop, one more. And that drivenness, that inner restlessness is to just stop for a moment. And there's a whole thing around learning to stop, learning to pause, just to breathe for a moment, drop into the body, and ask yourself, what do I need right now? In this moment, what do I need? And it is often something along those basic needs, like, I am thirsty. I just need a drink. Sometimes it's an alcoholic drink. But oftentimes it's just like, I need to eat. I need a trip to the bathroom. I need a rest.
Yeah.
You know? So finding ways to give that to ourselves in the moment, even if a longer rest is really needed, but it's not accessible. You're in the middle of a work day. You can't just go home and have an 8-hour nap. That might be needed. But how can you provide that for yourself? Just a gesture in that direction, a sense of being able to give yourself what you truly need. Imagining yourself as that little child, and your adult self now as the parent, giving that child what it needs. Even if you didn't receive it as a child, you can now give your inner child that as an adult, and start developing a trust in oneself that you can provide what you need for yourself.
That's hugely important. I'm so glad you brought that up. And even as you were talking, I got this image of like a little child, and a lot of that go, 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 see me, you know, because a lot of our professional drive is to be acknowledged, is to be seen. You know, look at me, all of that is that little child really wanting to feel, if you give me that friendly smile, mom or dad, to let me know I'm okay in the world, I get to be okay. And every moment we get the option to give that to ourselves. So that's a really cool addition.
Yeah, just to add to what Anne-Marie again said, I hate to be piggybacking on everything you're saying, Anne-Marie. It's just that a lot of our work is so similar.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to say was around habit building. A lot of my adult clients come to me because they're not in the habit of making habits. Sound that redundant, but it's very important to highlight and remind them to just a simple reminder sometimes is enough in letting them know that they are to divide their days. You know, there's a work portion, there's a sleep portion, which is very, very needed, which they tend to deprive themselves of because they're perfectionists and they want to get work done, you know, or for whatever other reason. And the third piece, which is probably the one that gets missed quite often, is personal care. So these three, you know, as a life coach, as a coach, it's very important in my line of work that I highlight a balanced approach. Yes, they come to me for maybe parenting needs, or they may come to me for work, you know, professional needs. But as a coach, it is also, I take it upon myself to remind them this is a balanced approach. And you won't feel rested in the area that you want to seek help in unless every other area of your life is also attended to. So
Right.
yeah, and that also ties into habit building. So I've seen some great success stories with adults learning to create habits for themselves and feeling that sense of, you know, empowerment that, wow, I can do it. Professionals, these are professional people, but they have, you know, they haven't had success in the past in creating healthy habits. So anyway, so yeah, it's all a wholesome approach, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have to say, Rajal, no, I'm going to piggyback on what you were saying. Because, yeah, early in my ADHD journey, I was diagnosed as an adult. And early on, I was seeking first, like, what is this diagnosis that I've been handed? What does it even mean? All I know is I'm struggling with certain aspects of my life, but now what? Like, I walked away with this diagnosis and like, there you go. Okay, how does this help me? So I was looking in a bunch of different places and looking for the solution, the fix, right? What will fix me? What will make the struggle less? But I slowly, painfully came to realize that no one person has the answer. And it was a matter of me collecting all the puzzle pieces and making sense of it for myself. So now in the work that I do with my clients who have ADHD is, I mean, I'm not the one answer either. And I encourage people to seek out their own resources. And because I've looked into so many for myself, I can be a person to connect people to different resources too that they're looking for. But we do, like Rajal mentioned, we do take a holistic look at someone's life. Because one really does affect the other. And I think to look at anything in isolation is really missing the boat, missing chances for healing. You know, and when I say healing, I don't necessarily mean curing ADHD. I mean, like healing those emotional wounds that we carry, having lived with ADHD, diagnosed or undiagnosed, up until this point in our lives.
Well, and just from what I take from what you're saying, you know, life can just find a new traction and a new way of going that you, and I think it's really important for any of us that have any type of diagnosis not to become identified with, not to let that define who you are. It's almost like, I don't know, I have pale skin, so I don't go out into the sun, you know, as an example. This is just, I wear a hat. It's not a deficiency. It's not something I have to cure. This is just something I do when I head out on the beaches. Silly example because I tan very well, but just the only thing I could think of.
So jealous.
I used your example. So I think so much of the time we get out of the language of fixing, and we move more into the idea of integrating. You know, that any symptom is our body's way of talking to us that, you know, look over here. This is where I need a little more love or a little more healing or a little more awareness. And if we follow it like a little bit of a track, we can stop making it something wrong or something to shove down or move away from, and instead look at it as a signal, and be in just more clear communication with our bodies.
Yeah. And really, I mean, that's why I called my company ADHD and Beyond, because really life is too grand to be limited by a label. So yes, ADHD, let's understand it, how it impacts you, and then let's move beyond it into really living the way you know you're capable of living. So, and defining success on one's own terms, I think is really important too. Not identifying with these little narrow definitions, but expanding. It's about expansion and coming into ourselves, right?
Exactly. And even what Rajal was sharing, to have these balanced, healthy habits too. For so many of us, that is success in its own right there. We've got these certain pillars that sort of just make life work. And then we've got that, and we work from that place. It's so powerful. Well, I think on that positive note around feeling resourced and really moving forward into life, that we can kind of wrap it up here. We're almost at the hour mark, and For any of you who are listening to the replay, I just want to thank you for your time and to pass it around the room so that my colleagues and I can share where to get in touch with us if you have personal questions. Maybe you'd like access to our suggested reading list. I bet you we've all got like a library of our own, right? Inside out. So Rajal, why don't you kick us off? If someone would like more information about how you work, how can they find you?
You can email me at Rajal at atxlifecoaching.com. ATX stands for Austin, Texas. That's where I'm based out of. Yeah, that would be probably the best way to reach me. I'm also on Facebook. I'm also on LinkedIn. So you can find me. I don't think there's anybody else out there with my name. So
perfect. So we just found your name. That's great.
Yeah.
And how about you, Anne-Marie?
I think the best way to contact me would be through my website, ADHD and Beyond, all spelled out, .com. And there's a way to contact me on that page. So I'd also like to offer people, one of the tools that my clients love is the executive function quiz or questionnaire. And it takes all of the executive functions, parcels them out, and looks at areas of strength and areas of weakness or areas of challenge. And I'd like to offer that to people if they contact me through my website. I'll send it to them for free and have a 30-minute can have a 30-minute consultation on any one of those areas if you'd like some strategies to try out that might that you'd like to shore up.
Oh, that's great. That's a huge value. I love these sort of self-inquiry, to have more self-understanding type of examples and quizzes. That's excellent.
Mm-hmm.
If anybody would like to learn more about what we inherit from our family, you can find me on my website, which is www.johannalynn.ca. You can find me on Facebook and LinkedIn under Johanna Lynn as well. I love to post articles and share a lot of the main scientific headlines coming out that seem to be published every day now. It's become such a hot topic. So if you're looking for more insight and information on that, you can find me there. And I just want to thank you again for joining us here. And we're more than open and welcome your questions. So thanks to Rajal and Anne-Marie for joining me, and thank you for Brad and Darren for joining us here, and wish you all a great day.
Thank you so much for having us, Joanna. This is a wonderful opportunity. Thank you.
Awesome. Glad you could be here.
I'd like to thank you as well. Thank you for reaching out. Yeah, what a wonderful opportunity to share.
I know the two of you really share my love in informing and educating, so I knew it would just be a great conversation.
Thank you so much.